He returned to a silent ranch, but the woman waiting there had saved his whole life. The first thing Samuel Beck saw was smoke. Not wild smoke, not the ugly black kind that meant ruin. It rose soft and gray from the chimney of the old ranch house, lifting into the cold Wyoming morning like somebody inside had put wood on the fire and expected the day to go on. Samuel stopped his tired horse at the top of the ridge. For 2 years he had carried one picture in his mind: his home broken down, his cattle gone, his barn caved in, and the bank sign nailed crooked to the gate. He had seen that picture so many times on the long road back that it had begun to feel like truth. But below him, the broken lantern ranch was standing. More than standing. The west fence had been rebuilt. Fresh posts cut a clean line along the creek. The barn roof, once sagging like an old man's back, wore new boards across the north side. In the lower pasture, cattle moved through frost-colored grass, slow and heavy, the way healthy cattle move when they have been fed right and watched close. Samuel did not breathe for a moment. His bay mare, June, lifted her head and gave a low sound. She knew the place. Even after the hard miles, even with one shoe missing and mud dried up her legs, she knew home. Samuel laid a hand on her neck. "Easy, girl," he whispered, though he was the one who needed steadying. He had left the valley with 37 head, 3 hired men, and a hope big enough to make him foolish. A winter storm in the Bighorn country had taken the herd trail apart. Fever took one man. A river crossing took another. The last man turned back when food ran thin and the snow came early. Samuel had kept moving because stopping felt too much like giving the dead the final word. Now his beard was wild, his coat torn, and his hands looked older than the rest of him. He had not slept under his own roof in 2 years and 4 months. He had not expected that roof to still be there. Then he saw her. A woman stood on the porch. She was tall enough that the doorway behind her looked small. Not just tall, but strong in a plain, quiet way, with broad shoulders under a faded work dress and a brown shawl pinned tight against the wind. Her hair was dark and pulled back. One hand rested on the porch post. The other held a rifle low at her side, not pointed, not threatening, but present. She watched him like she had been waiting a long time. Samuel rode down slowly. Every step brought some new sign of her work. The well cover had been repaired. The chicken yard had fresh wire. The garden beds had been turned for winter, neat and black beneath a dusting of frost. Near the barn door, split firewood stood stacked higher than his waist. Nothing looked rich. Nothing looked easy, but everything looked cared for. That frightened him more than ruins would have. Ruins would have made sense. A living ranch meant a story he did not know. He stopped June at the foot of the porch. The woman did not come down. Up close, she seemed even taller. There was dust on the hem of her dress, a small tear near one sleeve, and a flour mark across her wrist, as if she had left bread dough unfinished to step outside and meet him. Samuel removed his hat. His fingers shook, and he hated that she could see it. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she answered. Her voice was calm, low, not soft exactly, but steady, like a gate that had held through many storms. Samuel glanced at the house, then back at her. "I reckon you know this land belongs to me." "I do." His jaw tightened. "Then you know my name." "Samuel Beck." The sound of it struck him strangely. After so long being called stranger, drifter, survivor, and once poor devil by a man at a trading post, his own name felt almost foreign. He looked toward the cattle. "And you are?" "Clara Whitcomb." He waited for more. She gave none. The wind moved between them. A loose shutter tapped once against the side of the house. Somewhere in the barn, a horse shifted and blew out a heavy breath. Samuel swallowed. His throat felt scraped raw from cold and road dust. "Miss Whitcomb," he said carefully, "I have walked half dead through snow, slept under stone ledges, buried men I trusted, and come home expecting to find nothing left but debt and ashes. Instead, I find my ranch mended, my cattle alive, and a woman I never met standing on my porch with my chimney smoking behind her. Her face changed a little then, not a smile, something sadder. That sounds about right. He stared at her. She lowered the rifle, leaned it against the porch wall, and came down one step. Even then, she still looked over him by a few inches. The bank was 6 weeks from taking it, she said. The roof was leaking over the feed. The south fence was down. Your foreman had been gone near a year. Folks in Mercy Creek said you were dead. Samuel felt the old fear rise in him, the one he had carried across every mile. And you believed them? Clara's eyes held his. No, she said, not all the time. Those 4 words settled over him, harder than any accusation could have. He wanted to ask why. He wanted to demand what right she had. He wanted to fall to his knees in the yard and press his hands into the dirt just to feel that it was still his. But his body had reached the end of what pride could hold. His knees weakened. Clara saw it before he moved. She came down the last step fast, catching his arm with a grip strong enough to keep him upright and careful enough not to shame him. You need food, she said. I need answers. You'll get both, but food first. I don't take kindly to strangers making decisions for me. No, she said, looking at his hollow cheeks and trembling hand. I suppose you don't. For the first time, something like warmth touched her eyes. Then she turned toward the open door. Samuel looked past her into the house. His house. He could see a lantern on the table, a folded quilt on the chair and near the stove, a pair of large muddy boots set neatly beside the wall. It smelled of beans, cornbread, wood smoke, and something he had nearly forgotten. Home. Clara paused in the doorway and looked back. There's one thing you ought to know before you step inside, she said. Samuel's hand tightened around his hat. What thing? Her face became still again. I did not come here for your ranch. A cold feeling moved through him. Then what did you come for? Clara held his gaze as the firelight shifted behind her. To repay a kindness you don't remember giving. Samuel stepped into the kitchen like a man, entering a memory that had learned to live without him. The room was his, yet not his. The old pine table still stood near the west window, but one broken leg had been braced with new oak. The stove had been blacked and polished. Dried herbs hung from the beam above it, tied with string in small bundles that moved whenever the door let in wind. His old coffee tin sat on the shelf, but beside it were jars of beans, flour, and dried apples, each marked in a neat hand. On the wall near the stove hung a blue work apron. It was patched at the pocket and worn at the waist. A woman's apron, but made larger than most coats. Samuel stared at it longer than he meant to. Clara noticed but said nothing. She moved past him, set a bowl on the table, and ladled stew into it. Then she cut a thick square of cornbread and placed it beside the bowl. Sit, she said. It was not sharp. It was not soft either. It was the voice of someone who had spent years saying things once. Samuel wanted to refuse out of pride, but hunger answered before he could. He sat. The chair creaked under him. The sound nearly broke something in his chest. He remembered sitting in that same chair while rain tapped the windows, while his wife, Ellen, hummed near the stove, while the whole world had seemed hard but still possible. That was before fever came through Mercy Creek. Before Ellen was gone. Before Samuel rode out with cattle, because staying in that house had felt like being buried alive. He took one spoonful of stew, then another. Then he stopped pretending he was not starving. Clara poured coffee and sat across from him. She did not watch him in a way that made him feel pitied. She looked down at her own cup, giving him the mercy of not seeing everything. For a while, there was only the sound of the spoon against the bowl, the fire shifting in the stove, and June stamping outside at the rail. When Samuel finished the first bowl, Clara filled it again without asking. He looked up. You always give orders in another man's house. When the man looks ready to fall face first into his supper, yes. That should have angered him. Instead, it nearly made him smile. Nearly. He ate slower the second time. Finally, he pushed the bowl away and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Now. Clara folded both hands around her coffee mug. Her hands were large, work-rough, with a small burn mark near one thumb and a pale scar across 2 knuckles. 2 years ago, she said, I was living east of Mercy Creek, near Red Willow Draw. My father had left me a poor piece of land and 3 milk cows. I was trying to keep it after my brother Daniel went lame from a wagon accident. Samuel listened, though his body begged for sleep. We owed money to Mercer's feed and grain, not much by a rich man's measure, enough to ruin poor people. Then Daniel took sick. I sold 1 cow for medicine, sold another for flour. By spring, I had 1 cow left, no seed money, and Mercer ready to take the land. Samuel's brow drew tight. Some pieces stirred in him. A store, rain on a boardwalk, a woman in a brown coat standing with her back straight while 2 men near the stove whispered and laughed low. Clara looked at him and saw the faint memory waking. You were passing through town, she said. Buying supplies before your drive. I never spoke to you. I did not ask you for a cent. I would not have. No, Samuel said quietly. I remember that. Her eyes lowered. I had gone to Mercer to beg for another month. He gave me until sundown. I walked out with my hands shaking so bad I could not button my coat. There were men watching. One of them said a woman built like a barn ought to be strong enough to carry her own troubles. Samuel's face hardened. Clara lifted one shoulder. As if the words were old stones she had carried too long to count them fresh. I went home to pack. Next morning Mercer rode out with a receipt, said the debt was settled, said the man who paid it told him not to give a name. Samuel looked toward the stove. He remembered more now. He had been angry that day, though not in any grand way, just quietly angry. The kind of anger that rises when a decent person is cornered and a room full of people decides watching is easier than helping. I paid Mercer, he said. It was not much. It was everything. His eyes came back to hers. Clara's voice stayed steady, but one finger moved along the rim of her cup, slow and restless. You paid the feed debt. You paid for Daniel's medicine too. The doctor told me that part later. Samuel frowned. I had forgotten. I did not. A silence opened between them. Clara stood and carried the bowls to the wash basin. After word came that your drive was lost, she said, folks started talking about this place. Bankers talk loud when they think the owner is dead. Mercer said the Beck ranch would be sold before Christmas. I knew what that meant. A roof left empty does not stay a roof long out here. Samuel watched her back. So you came. I came to look first. And then. She turned. Her face was calm, but her eyes were tired in a way he understood too well. The barn had a hole big enough for snow to drift over the feed. The south fence was down. 2 cows had broken through and gone half wild near the creek. Your well rope was near split. There was a bank notice nailed to the front door. Samuel swallowed hard. Clara dried her hands on a cloth. I meant to stay a week. But you stayed 2 years. 2 years and 4 months. Why? She looked past him, toward the window where the cold light touched the glass. Because every time I fixed one thing, I saw the next thing that would be lost if I left. Samuel stood too quickly. The room swayed. He gripped the back of the chair until it settled. This was not your burden. No, Clara said, it was not. Then why carry it? She walked to the shelf near the stove and took down a small folded paper, yellowed and soft at the edges. She laid it on the table. Samuel knew the handwriting before he touched it. His breath caught. Ellen. The letters were faded, but her hand was there, gentle and slanted, the way it had been on grocery lists, birthday notes, and the last letter she wrote before fever stole her strength. Clara spoke quietly. I found it under a loose floorboard while fixing the pantry. It was addressed to you. Samuel stared at the paper like it might burn him. I never opened it, she said, but I kept it safe. His hand hovered over the letter, trembling worse now than it had in the cold. Clara stepped back, giving him room. Samuel lifted the paper. On the front in Ellen's hand were 5 words. For Samuel when he returns. Samuel did not open the letter right away. He held it between both hands, standing beside the table while the kitchen seemed to grow smaller around him. The fire snapped once in the stove. Clara moved quietly to the sink, but even that small sound felt far away. For 2 years, Samuel had dreamed of coming home and finding the ranch gone. He had not prepared himself to come home and find Ellen waiting in ink. His thumb moved over her name that was not written there, only felt there. Ellen had always folded letters the same way, clean at the edges, one corner tucked under like she was putting a blanket around the words. Clara kept her back turned. She was giving him privacy without leaving him alone. Samuel sat slowly. His knees had gone weak again, but this time it was not from hunger. He broke the fold. The paper made a soft, dry sound, like leaves under a boot. Clara heard his breathing change. Samuel read the first line, then stopped. His eyes closed hard. The letter was not long. Ellen had written it during the first days of her fever when she must have known more than she had told him. Her words were simple, almost plain, and that made them cut deeper. She told him not to turn the house into a grave. She told him the ranch had been built for living, not for mourning. She told him that if life ever brought kindness to his door after she was gone, he must not be too proud or too broken to let it enter. By the time he reached the last line, his hand had closed tight around the paper. Clara turned then, not fully, just enough to see whether he was still sitting. Samuel looked up. His face had gone pale beneath the beard. She knew, he said. Clara's voice was low. Knew what? That I would run. Clara said nothing. Samuel looked down at the letter again. She knew me better than I knew myself. Outside, June gave a soft whinny from the rail. The sound carried him back to a spring evening long before sorrow had changed the shape of the house. Ellen had stood in the yard with flour on her cheek, laughing because June had stolen half an apple from her apron pocket. Samuel had thought then that hard years could come, but they would not beat them. He had been wrong. He folded the letter with care, though his hands shook. Then he pressed it to his chest and bent forward over the table. Clara looked away. A man like Samuel Beck did not cry loudly. He did not sob where someone could comfort him easy. His grief came through him like weather through a cracked wall, silent and cold and strong enough to make the whole house feel it. Clara walked to the stove and stirred the fire, though it did not need stirring. She gave him that kindness too. After a while, Samuel wiped his face with his sleeve and sat upright. You found this under the pantry floor. Yes. When? First winter. His eyes lifted. You kept it all this time. I figured it belonged in your hand, not mine. You could have burned it, could have left it, could have sold this place and never thought on it again. I could have done many things, Clara said. I did this one. That was Clara he was beginning to see. Not soft in the way people expected women to be, not gentle in her shape or easy in her manner, but there was a kind of mercy in her that did not ask to be admired. It just worked. It fixed roofs, guarded letters, paid debts, fed half-dead men, and stood between a ranch and ruin because leaving would have felt wrong. Samuel put the letter in the inside pocket of his coat. The room changed after that, not because anything had been settled, but because something had been opened. Clara set a cup of fresh coffee near him. "You should sleep." "If I sleep, I might not wake till Sunday." "Then I will keep the place from falling down until Sunday." He almost smiled. This time it reached his eyes for a breath. "You've been doing that already." "Yes," she said, "I have." There was no pride in it, just truth. For a little while they sat across from each other while afternoon faded into gray. Samuel noticed things he had missed before: a mended curtain near the window, a clean cloth over the bread, a small wooden horse on the shelf. He nodded toward it. "That yours?" Clara followed his look. For the first time since he had met her, something guarded crossed her face. "My brother made it." "Daniel." "Yes." "For a child." Her hand tightened around her cup, "for the one he hoped I'd have someday." Samuel understood too late that he had stepped near pain. "I'm sorry," he said. Clara gave a small shake of her head. "No harm done." But harm had been done somewhere before him. He could see it in the way she looked at that little wooden horse without touching it. The house held two ghosts now, Ellen in a folded letter, Clara's lost hope in a carved toy. Samuel leaned back, worn to the bone. "You said your brother went lame. Is he still in Red Willow?" Clara's eyes lowered. "No." The word was too quiet. Before Samuel could ask more, hoofbeats sounded outside. Both of them turned toward the door. Not one horse, several. Clara stood at once. The softness left her face. She crossed to the window and moved the curtain only enough to see through. Samuel rose too, slower, one hand on the table. "Who is it?" he asked. Clara's jaw set. "Bank men don't ride this late," she said. The hoofbeats stopped in the yard. A man's voice called from outside, smooth and loud. "Mrs. Whitcomb, I know you're in there." Samuel looked at Clara. Her face had gone still, but he saw the truth in her eyes. She knew that voice, and whatever had followed it here was not good. If this moment touched your heart, stay with the story, because some debts are paid in money, and some return wearing a stranger's face at sundown. Clara did not answer the man outside. She reached for the rifle by the door, not fast, not foolish, just with the calm motion of a woman who had learned that fear made poor decisions when it was allowed to lead. Samuel noticed her hand. It did not tremble, but her knuckles had gone white around the stock. The voice came again from the yard. "No need to hide, I only came to talk." Samuel moved toward the window. Clara lifted one hand without looking at him. "Stay back from the glass." He stopped. That told him more than the voice had. Outside, a horse snorted. Leather creaked. One man laughed low, and the laugh had a mean edge to it, the kind men used when they wanted the house to know there were more of them than there were of you. Samuel's body was weak, but something old and stubborn rose in him. "Who is he?" he asked. Clara kept her eyes on the door. "Warren Pike." The name meant nothing to Samuel. "He works for Mercer. He works for whoever pays him to make poor people feel smaller." Samuel's jaw tightened. The man outside called again. "Mrs. Whitcomb, I know Beck ain't in there. Folks saw a scarecrow ride in, but dead men don't come home proper. Could be anybody using his name." Samuel looked at Clara. She did not look surprised. "He came before?" Samuel asked. "Twice last winter." "For what?" "To tell me the bank would sell soon. To tell me I ought to leave before men came to carry my things out." "And did the bank send him?" "No." The answer landed heavy. Samuel understood now. Men like Warren Pike did not come to speak truth. They came to bend it until it scared somebody. Clara opened the door before Samuel could stop her. Cold air rushed in. She stepped onto the porch with the rifle low at her side. Samuel stood behind her in the shadow of the doorway, close enough to see the yard, not close enough for the riders to see much of him. There were 3 men near the hitch rail. The one in front wore a tan coat too clean for the mud he rode through. His face was narrow, his mustache trimmed sharp, his smile made without warmth. 2 others sat behind him, both rougher, both watching Clara the way idle men watch something they do not understand and have decided to mock before it can make them uneasy. Warren Pike tipped his hat. "Well now," he said, "there she is, tall as a church door and twice as hard to move." One of the men behind him chuckled. Clara's face did not change. "You're trespassing," she said. "Not if I came on business." "You have no business here." Pike looked past her at the house. "I heard your ghost came back." Samuel stepped forward then. He came into the light slowly, hat in hand, coat hanging loose on his thin frame, beard rough, eyes sunken from hunger and road. He knew how he looked. Half dead was not far from the truth. But he stood in his own doorway. Pike's smile faltered for one breath. Samuel saw it and held on to it. "I'm Samuel Beck," he said. "State your business or ride out." Pike recovered quickly but not fully. His eyes moved over Samuel's torn coat, his hollow cheeks, his shaking hands. Men like Pike were good at smelling weakness. What they missed, sometimes, was the kind of weakness that had already survived worse things than them. "Well," Pike said, "Mercy Creek will be glad to hear the mountains gave something back." "Mercy Creek can hear it from me. I only came to make sure Mrs. Whitcomb here wasn't being misled. A woman alone can be taken in by a stranger." Clara's eyes hardened. Samuel took one step down. His legs protested, but he did not show it. "You came out here after sundown, with 2 men to protect her good judgment." Pike's smile thinned. "I came to warn her. There are questions about this property, questions about debts, questions about who had the right to handle Mr. Beck's affairs while he was missing." Samuel glanced at Clara. She was still as stone beside him, but he could see the smallest change in her breathing. This was not random. Someone had sent Pike. "Who's asking?" Samuel said. "Concerned parties." "Concerned parties have names." Pike leaned on the saddle horn. "Names cost money." Samuel came down one more step. "Then I reckon you rode all this way poor." One of Pike's men shifted in his saddle. Clara moved the rifle slightly, not up, just enough. The man stopped shifting. Pike looked at her and laughed under his breath. "You always did like acting bigger than the law." Clara's voice was quiet. "No, I just learned the law arrives late when men like you arrive early." The yard went still. Samuel looked at her then, truly looked. There was history in that sentence. Not only anger, shame, memory, and something she had buried deep because work had needed doing. Pike heard it too, and his smile sharpened. "Careful, Clara. Some stories ain't improved by being repeated." Samuel's hand closed around the porch rail. Clara did not move, but all the color left her face. Pike had found a wound and touched it in front of strangers. Samuel's voice dropped. "You'll not speak to her that way on my land." Pike looked back at him. "Your land, that may be a matter for lawyers now. A missing man. A woman paying notes with money from who knows where. A partnership no court has seen. Folks will wonder." "Let them. They will." Samuel came to the bottom step. His body hurt. His hunger had turned to cold sweat, but his eyes were clear. "Then they can wonder while I'm standing in front of them." For a moment, Pike seemed to weigh whether the half-starved man before him had enough left to be dangerous. He must have decided danger was not always measured in muscle. He gathered his reins. This valley is changing, Beck. Men who understand money are coming in. Best sell while there's still a choice. Samuel said nothing. Pike turned his horse, then paused and looked back at Clara. You should have stayed in Red Willow after Daniel died. The word struck like a slap. Clara's rifle rose an inch before she caught herself. Samuel saw it, Pike saw it too. That was why he smiled. Then he and the two riders turned and moved out through the gate, their horses kicking up thin dust in the fading light. Clara stood on the porch until the hoofbeats disappeared. Only then did the rifle lower. Samuel wanted to ask about Daniel, about Pike, about what story Pike had threatened to repeat, but Clara's face warned him not to reach too quickly. She turned toward the house. I'll bring June into the barn, she said. You don't have to do that now. Yes, she answered, I do. She walked past him into the yard, tall and straight, carrying herself like nothing had touched her at all. But when she reached June, Samuel saw her put one hand against the mare's neck and stand there too long, her head bowed where no one but the horse could see. Clara did not speak of Warren Pike that night. She brought June into the barn, rubbed the mare down, checked the missing shoe, laid out feed, and moved through each chore with the same hard care she gave everything. Samuel stood near the stall door with a lantern in his hand, watching the yellow light slide over the beams she had repaired, the clean hay she had stacked, the tools arranged on their pegs. It was strange to be useless in a place that carried his name. His body wanted rest, but his mind would not stop circling Pike's last words. You should have stayed in Red Willow after Daniel died. Clara kept her back to him while she filled the water bucket. Your arm is shaking, she said. Samuel looked down. The lantern in his hand trembled. So is yours. Her hand stopped on the pump handle. For a moment the barn was quiet except for the horses breathing and the wind pushing loose dust under the door. Then Clara resumed working. Mine will pass, she said. That man knew where to hurt you. Men like him usually do. Samuel waited. She offered nothing more. He should have let it rest. A better man might have. But Samuel had come home to find his ranch saved by a woman with scars he could not see, and now those scars had followed her into his yard with 3 horses and a smile full of poison. Was Daniel your brother? He asked. Clara set the bucket down harder than she meant to. Water jumped over the rim and darkened the dirt floor. Yes. How did he die? She looked at him then. Her face did not show anger but something older than anger. Because a man with money wanted land that did not belong to him. Samuel said nothing. Clara took the lantern from his hand and hung it on a nail. The light swung between them. Red Willow draw was never much, she said. Dry in summer, mean in winter, but it was ours. Daniel thought if we held it long enough, planted the lower acre, kept the cow alive and paid Mercer down bit by bit, we could make something plain and honest out of it. Her voice stayed steady, but her eyes had gone far from the barn. Then a cattle buyer named Silas Vane started buying land east of Mercy Creek. Not for himself, at least not under his own name. Men like that rarely show both hands. Folks who sold early got fair money. Folks who refused found trouble waiting. Samuel's jaw tightened. What kind of trouble? Fences cut, wells fouled, paperwork questioned, debt notes called due all at once, men riding close at night to remind you how far your nearest neighbor lived. Samuel thought of Pike in the yard. Smooth voice, clean coat, dirty purpose. Pike worked for Vane. Yes. And Daniel. Clara's fingers closed around the edge of the feed bin. Daniel would not sell. He was lame by then, but he still had pride enough for 2 men. Pike came one evening to make another offer. Daniel told him no in words he should not have used with a man looking for excuse. Her mouth tightened. The next week our last cow was found loose near the ravine. Daniel went after her before dawn. The ground was wet. His bad leg failed on the slope. Samuel felt the answer before she gave it. "He fell?" he asked softly. Clara nodded once. "I found him after sunup." The barn seemed to pull in around them. June lowered her head and nosed at the hay, unaware of how much sorrow had entered the air. Clara's voice dropped. There were cut marks on the fence, fresh ones. Pike said wind must have brought a branch down. There was no branch. Samuel's hands curled. "Did the sheriff do anything?" "The sheriff said a cut fence did not prove murder. He was right by law, wrong by truth." She looked at Samuel then. "That is something you learn out here. Law and truth do not always ride the same horse." Samuel stood very still. "And after Daniel died?" "Vane's men came back, offered half what the land was worth. Mercer wanted his money. I had funeral debt. I had one cow gone and no brother left to help me stand against any of it." She gave a humorless little breath. "Then you paid Mercer before they could close their hands around my throat." Samuel looked down at the straw near his boots. He had thought that small act was finished the moment he rode away. Pay a debt, leave a receipt, move on. But no act ever truly ended where a man left it. Sometimes it kept walking without him. Clara wiped a hand across her face quickly. Not quite tears, not quite dust. "I sold Red Willow later anyway," she said. "Not to Vane, never to him. I sold it to a family with children and took less money just to spite his shadow. Then I heard your place was next." "So you came here?" "Yes. To fight the same kind of men. To keep them from winning twice." That answer settled into Samuel like a stone dropped in deep water. For the first time since he had ridden in, he understood that Clara had not merely saved his ranch out of gratitude. She had chosen a battlefield. His home had become the place where she answered for her brother, for her own lost land, and maybe for every quiet person pushed aside by men who knew how to smile while stealing. If you believe one act of kindness can travel farther than a man ever planned, hold close to this story, because Clara's debt was never just about money. The next morning, Mercy Creek knew Samuel Beck had returned. By noon, 2 neighbors rode out. Harlan Price came first, wide-bellied and red-faced, with his hat crushed in his hands and honest relief in his eyes. Behind him came his wife, Mabel, carrying a covered basket and wearing the stern look of a woman prepared to feed the sick whether they consented or not. Harlan gripped Samuel's hand in both of his. "Lord above, Beck, we buried you in talk a dozen times." "Glad the talk was wrong," Samuel said. Mabel looked him over. "You need broth, sleep, and a shave in that order." Clara turned away, but Samuel saw the corner of her mouth move. They went inside. Mabel unpacked biscuits, dried peaches, and a jar of preserves. Harlan spoke of cattle prices, road conditions, and who had married whom while Samuel was gone. But beneath every ordinary word sat the same waiting question. "What happens now?" At last Harlan cleared his throat. "Pike was at Mercer's store this morning." Clara's hand stilled over the coffee pot. Samuel looked at him, saying what? "That you may not be Samuel Beck." Samuel laughed once without humor. Harlan did not smile. "He says a half-starved stranger could claim any dead man's ranch if a woman helped him do it." Mabel's face went tight with disgust. "Warren Pike has always had a rotten tongue." "He ain't only using his tongue," Harlan said. "There's talk of a hearing at the bank. Mr. Avery wants proof before he keeps recognizing you as owner." Samuel's eyes moved to Clara. She had gone pale, but she did not look afraid. She looked as if a storm she had expected had finally reached the fence line. "When?" Samuel asked. "Friday morning." Samuel leaned back in his chair. His body was still weak. His beard was wild. His papers, if any remained, might be lost somewhere between mountain snow and trail mud. Pike knew it. Clara knew it too. Then Mabel set her basket down and looked at Clara with sudden softness. "You kept something, didn't you?" Clara's eyes lifted. Samuel turned toward her. "What does she mean?" For a long moment, Clara said nothing. Then she walked to the pantry, knelt beside the lower cabinet, and lifted a loose board Samuel had never noticed. From beneath it, she drew out a small tin box. She set it on the table between them. "This house had more secrets than the letter," she said, "and one of them may prove who you are." The tin box looked too small to carry that much hope. Samuel stared at it while Clara stood beside the table, one hand resting on the lid. The box was old, square, and blackened at the corners, with a little rust near the latch. He knew it at once and still felt surprised by it, the way a man can know a face in a dream and not understand why it has come back. "That was Ellen's," he said. Clara nodded. "I found it under the pantry boards when I was setting traps the first winter." Samuel touched the lid with 2 fingers. "She kept thread in it, buttons, receipts she thought mattered more than I did. She was right about some of them." Clara opened it. Inside lay a few folded papers, a dried ribbon, an old brass button, and a tintype wrapped in cloth. Samuel did not reach for anything at first. The sight of Ellen's careful keeping struck him harder than he expected. Even in death, she had left order where he had left grief. Clara lifted the tintype first. Samuel and Ellen stood in front of the very porch outside. Samuel was younger in the picture, cleaner, with a dark hat tilted in a way Ellen had always said made him look too pleased with himself. Ellen sat in a chair beside him, one hand resting on his sleeve, her eyes bright even through the faded silver image. Mabel leaned close and drew in a breath. "That is him," she said. "Thinner now, Lord knows, but that is Samuel Beck." Harlan nodded. A man does not lose his eyes, even when he loses half his weight. Samuel looked down at the photograph. His throat tightened, but he held himself steady. Clara unfolded the papers one by one. The first was the land deed. The second was the brand registration for the Broken Lantern mark. The third was a receipt from the bank, signed by Samuel in a younger hand, steady and bold. There was also a letter from Ellen to the bank, asking that a copy of their mortgage note be kept safe in town because Samuel misplaces papers when cattle are calving and calls it weather. For the first time that day, Samuel laughed. It came out rough and small, but it was real. Clara glanced at him. "She had you measured well," she said. "She did." The laugh faded into something softer. Mabel touched the dried ribbon in the box. "What's this?" Samuel's face changed. "From our wedding." Clara looked away, as if she had opened a door she had no right to stand in. Samuel noticed. "You kept it safe," he said. "That is all." "No," he said quietly, "that is not all." Clara closed the box with care. "It may be enough for the bank." But on Friday morning, it nearly was not. Mercy Creek's bank sat at the corner of Main and Cattle Street, a square wooden building with clean windows and a brass bell on the door. Samuel had walked through that door many times before his drive, but never like this. Never with hollow cheeks, worn boots, and the feeling that his name itself had to be defended. Clara walked beside him. People watched from the boardwalk. Some did not bother to hide it. A woman outside the dry goods store whispered behind her glove. 2 boys stopped rolling a wagon hoop and stared at Clara's height until their mother pulled them away by their collars. Clara kept her eyes forward. Samuel could feel how much practice it took for her to do that. Inside, Mr. Avery waited behind his desk, thin and gray, with ink stains on his fingers and worry pinched into every line of his face. Warren Pike stood near the window, smiling like he had paid rent on the room. Beside him was a man Samuel had not seen before. The stranger wore a dark coat, smooth gloves, and a pale hat too fine for Mercy Creek mud. His hair was silver at the temples, his face handsome in a cold way. He did not look at Samuel like a man looked at another man. He looked at him like land being measured. Clara stopped. Samuel felt it before she spoke. "Sela's vein," she said. The stranger turned to her with a small smile. "Mrs. Whitcomb, still standing taller than your troubles, I see. Her face did not move, and you are still hiding theft under clean gloves." Mr. Avery cleared his throat quickly. "Let us keep this civil." "Civil is easy for men who send others to do cruel work," Clara said. Pike's smile twitched. Samuel stepped forward. "I came to prove who I am." Vane looked him over. "That is one question, there are others." Samuel placed the tin box on Avery's desk. Clara opened it and laid out the deed, the brand paper, the old bank receipt, the tintype, and Ellen's letter. Avery examined each piece carefully. His eyes moved from the photograph to Samuel's face, then to the signature on the receipt. "This is strong," Avery said. "Strong enough," Samuel answered. Pike leaned from the window. "A photograph can be explained, papers can be found, a signature can be copied." Samuel turned toward him. "You calling my dead wife careless?" "I am calling this situation unusual." Clara's voice was flat. "You call anything unusual when it stands in your way." Vane raised one gloved hand. "No need for heat. Mr. Avery, ownership identity may be settled, but the larger matter remains. Mrs. Whitcomb paid notes on this property, while Mr. Beck was legally presumed dead by much of the town." "Presumed by gossip," Samuel said, "not law." Vane smiled. "Gossip often reaches the courthouse before truth saddles its horse." Avery looked uncomfortable. "There is no death certificate." "No," Vane said, "but there is a question of authority. A woman with no legal claim used funds from the ranch, sold cattle, and altered property. That may affect the standing of the mortgage." Clara's hand closed at her side. Samuel heard her breath change. Avery looked down at the papers. "The payments were accepted." "Under uncertainty," Vane said smoothly. "And if the bank accepted improper payment, it may need to review the account." Samuel understood the trap then. They could not prove he was false, so they would make Clara's saving of the ranch look like a mistake. They would turn every repaired fence and every paid note into a question mark. Clara stepped closer to the desk. "I paid with my own money first," she said. "Then with ranch income from cattle I kept alive." Vane looked at her with mild interest. "Can you prove every dollar?" The room went quiet. Avery's eyes lowered. Samuel looked at Clara. For the first time since he had known her, true fear crossed her face. Not fear of Vane. Fear that work done honestly, in storm and hunger and mud, could be made to look crooked by a man with polished words. Then Samuel remembered something. "The ledger," he said. Clara turned to him. "The ranch ledger," he said again. "You kept one." "I did." "Where is it?" "At the house." Pike smiled. "Convenient." Samuel stepped toward him, but Clara caught his sleeve. "Not hard, just enough." Her touch steadied him. Vane picked up his hat. "Bring the ledger Monday. Until then, Mr. Avery, I advise no further recognition of any arrangement involving Mrs. Whitcomb." He walked to the door, then paused beside Clara. His voice dropped low enough that only she and Samuel could hear. "You should have learned at Red Willow. Land always goes to the hand strong enough to take it." Clara lifted her eyes to his. "No," she said, "only when good people get tired of holding on." Vane's smile faded. Then he left, with Pike following close behind. Samuel stood in the bank, weak with rage and worry. The tin box had saved his name, but Clara's work, the very thing that kept his home alive, was now on trial. And Monday was coming. The ride home from Mercy Creek felt longer than the road Samuel had taken down from the mountains. Neither he nor Clara spoke much. The wagon wheels cut through ruts hardened by frost, and the tin box rested between them on the seat like a small iron heart. Samuel kept one hand near it, not because he thought Clara would lose it, but because he needed to feel something solid. Clara looked straight ahead. The wind pushed loose strands of dark hair against her cheek. She did not brush them away. Her jaw was set, but Samuel could see the strain in the way her shoulders held too still beneath her coat. "They want you angry," she said at last. Samuel turned. "I am angry." "I know, that is why I said it." He looked back at the road. "They took your brother's land. They took more than land. And now they mean to take mine." She gave a small nod. "Yes." "Then anger seems a fair thing." "Fair, yes. Useful, not always." That stung because it was true. Samuel had spent 2 years surviving on stubbornness, hunger, and the kind of anger that kept a man walking when hope had long gone quiet. But courts and banks did not care how cold a man had been. They cared about papers, dates, signatures, numbers in ink. "The ledger will show it," he said. "It should." That one word made him look at her. "Should." Clara's eyes stayed on the team. "I kept every payment, every sale, every sack of feed bought, every nail, every doctor bill for the cattle, every dollar from my own pocket. But Vane is not asking because he cares what is true. He is asking because he expects truth to be hard to prove." Samuel's hand tightened on his knee. "Is it?" "Not if the ledger is where I left it." By the time they reached the broken lantern, the sun had dropped low and red behind the hills. The yard looked peaceful in the evening light. Smoke rose from the chimney. The cattle stood dark against the pale grass. June called from the barn when she heard the wagon. For one breath, Samuel wanted to believe the place was safe simply because it looked safe. Then Clara stopped walking. The kitchen door was open. Not wide, just a few inches. "Enough." Clara caught his sleeve. "Careful." He took the porch steps slowly. The old board near the door gave its familiar groan under his boot. Inside, the kitchen was dim. The stove had burned low. A chair lay tipped on its side. One jar had broken near the pantry, scattering dried beans across the floor like little brown stones. Samuel felt cold move through him. Clara came in behind him and went straight to the shelf near the window. The ledger was gone. She stood there, one hand hovering over the empty place. Samuel did not need to ask. He crossed the room, checked the table, the pantry, the cabinet under the sink, though he knew already. The house had not been ransacked like a thief looking for silver. It had been searched by someone who knew exactly what he wanted. Clara bent and picked up one of the beans from the floor. Her face was calm in a way that frightened him. "I should have taken it with us," she said. "You could not know." "I did know enough." "No," Samuel said sharply. "Do not do that. Do not carry the crime and call it your mistake." Her hand closed around the bean. For a moment he thought she would argue. Instead, she set it on the table. "They may not have destroyed it," she said. "If Vane is careful, he will want to read it first, find what can hurt us. And if there is nothing, then he will make something look crooked." Samuel looked around the kitchen. His home had been entered. Ellen's house, Clara's refuge, the place where bread had been set before him and a dead woman's letter had waited beneath a floorboard. He wanted to ride back to town and drag Warren Pike out by his collar. Clara saw that too. "Samuel." He did not answer. "Look at me." He turned. Her voice was firm, but her eyes were tired. "If you go after Pike tonight, they win before Monday." He breathed through his nose hard. They came into my house. Yes. They stole from you. Yes. And we are meant to sit here. No, Clara said, we are meant to think. That was when the back door opened. Samuel spun. Harlan Price stood there with both hands raised, his face pale beneath his hat. Easy, it's me. Behind him, Mabel held a lantern. Her eyes moved over the broken jar, the tipped chair, Clara's empty shelf. "Oh, Clara," she whispered. Samuel lowered his hand from the rifle hanging near the stove. "You picked a strange time to visit." Harlan stepped inside. "We saw riders cutting across the creek road from your place. 3 of them. Could not see faces in the dark, but one rode a pale horse." "Pike," Clara said. Mabel set the lantern on the table. "Did they take something?" "The ledger," Samuel said. Harlan shut his eyes briefly. "Lord help us." Clara straightened. "Did you follow them?" "Far as the ridge, they split. 2 went toward town, 1 turned east." "East?" Samuel asked. Clara looked toward the window. "Red Willow Road." The name settled over the room. Harlan rubbed his jaw. "There's an old line cabin out that way. Belonged to Vane's outfit years back." Samuel reached for his coat. "Then we go." Clara stepped in his path, not blind in the dark. "I can ride." "You can barely stand after a day in town." He hated that she was right. Mabel spoke then. "There may be another way." Everyone looked at her. She placed one hand on the table, beside the little bean Clara had picked from the floor. "Clara, when you sold eggs, I paid you in cash twice last winter. You wrote me receipts from that ledger and gave me copies." Clara's eyes lifted. Harlan nodded slowly. "I bought 2 steers from you spring before last. You wrote me a bill of sale." "And I paid you for fence work," Mabel said. "So did the brewers. So did half the women who traded with you when the men were still busy deciding whether to respect you." Clara stood very still. Samuel felt the room change. The ledger had been the neatest proof, but it was not the only proof. Clara's work had not happened in silence. It had passed through hands, kitchens, barns, and market days. Every person who bought eggs, sold hay, carried timber, lent a tool, or watched her mend a winter-broken ranch had become a living page. Harlan lifted his hat. "We can gather them." "By Monday?" Samuel asked. Mabel's mouth set. "By Sunday night." Clara looked down, and for the first time since the bank, her face loosened with something close to hope. Then a sound came from the porch. All 4 turned. A folded paper slid under the front door. Samuel crossed the room and picked it up. There were only 6 words written inside. "Come alone, or the ledger burns." Samuel read the note twice. The words did not change. "Come alone, or the ledger burns." The kitchen seemed to lose all its warmth. The stove still glowed. The lantern still burned on the table. Mabel still stood near the broken jar with one hand pressed to her chest. But the room felt suddenly like open country in winter, with no shelter close enough. Clara reached for the paper. Samuel let her take it. Her eyes moved across the words. Nothing in her face broke, but something in her went very quiet. "They want you," she said. Samuel shook his head. "They want me angry enough to come foolish." "And will you?" He looked at her. "No." The answer surprised Harlan. It surprised Samuel too. A day earlier he might have gone. A week earlier, fresh off the mountain and full of old grief, he might have saddled June with shaking hands and ridden into any darkness that dared call his name. But now he was looking at Clara's pale face, Mabel's fierce worry, Harlan's weathered hands, and the broken beans scattered across the floor. This was not just his fight anymore. Maybe it never had been. Clara folded the note and set it on the table. "If we do nothing, they burn it." If I go alone, they burn more than paper." Mabel nodded hard. "That is the first sensible thing said since supper." Harlan walked to the window and looked out into the yard. "Whoever slipped that under the door is close." Samuel took the rifle from the wall, but Clara touched his wrist. "Not wild," she said. "I know. Do you?" He met her eyes. The worry in them cut through his anger more cleanly than fear ever could. "Yes," he said, "I know." They searched the yard by lantern light, slow and careful. The night had gone cold enough to harden the mud near the porch. Behind the woodpile, Harlan found the heel marks of a man who had stood there longer than passing required. Near the fence, Clara found a thread caught on a splinter. Fine dark wool, not from a ranch coat. "Vain," Samuel said. "Or a man paid by him," Clara answered. Harlan lifted the lantern higher. "Trail heads east." Samuel looked into the dark beyond the creek road. Somewhere out there, the ledger might be sitting in a cabin beside a lamp, its pages in the hands of a man who believed every honest thing could be twisted if only the right words were used. Clara stood beside Samuel, her shawl drawn tight, her face turned toward the east. "He wants me to feel like Red Willow again," she said quietly. Samuel looked at her. She did not turn. A house broken into, papers taken, a choice made small, a warning in the dark. "He thinks if he makes the shape familiar, I will remember losing." "And do you?" "Yes." The honesty of it moved through him. Then she looked at Samuel. "But I also remember surviving." They did not ride east that night. That was Clara's decision, and Samuel, though every nerve in him fought against it, agreed. Instead, they made the house ready. Harlan slept in a chair near the front door with a shotgun across his knees. Mabel refused to leave Clara and took the small room off the kitchen. Samuel lay on the parlor settee, but he did not sleep. Clara stayed at the table, writing names on scrap paper until the candle burned low. Brewer, Price, Mabel, Doris Cross, Mercer, Dr. Hale, the blacksmith, the woman who bought eggs, the man who sold nails, the boy who helped unload timber and told everyone in town Clara lifted more than he did. Living pages. By dawn, the plan had hardened. Harlan would ride north to the Brewers. Mabel would go to the women in Mercy Creek who had traded with Clara and kept receipts in drawers, Bible pages, and kitchen tins. Samuel and Clara would ride to town last, after stopping by the old Red Willow Road in daylight to look for what could be found without stepping into Vane's trap. The morning came gray and sharp. Clara made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Nobody complained. Samuel ate because Clara set food before him and watched until he did. It was not much, only bread and cold beans, but it steadied his hands. Before they left, Clara stood alone for a moment by the pantry shelf where the ledger used to rest. Samuel came up beside her. "We will get it back," he said. "Maybe. We will prove the truth either way." She looked at him then. "That is better." He gave a tired smile. "You are hard to comfort." "I have had practice not needing it." "That is not the same as not needing it." Clara said nothing, but her eyes lowered. For a breath, the house was very still. Then she reached for her coat. They rode east under a pale sky. Samuel's body complained with every mile, but he kept steady in the saddle. Clara rode beside him on a broad chestnut mare named Mercy, a horse as calm and strong as the woman who rode her. The old Red Willow Road bent through low brush and dry grass. The land there looked poorer, rougher, as if even spring had to argue its way out of the soil. After an hour, they saw the line cabin Harlan had spoken of. It stood near a cottonwood grove, weathered and leaning, with one window boarded and a narrow chimney cold against the sky. No smoke. No horses. Samuel and Clara dismounted behind a rise and approached on foot. The door hung open. Inside, the cabin smelled of cold ash, damp wood, and men who had left in a hurry. There was a table, 2 chairs, a broken crate, and a lantern still warm to the touch. Clara's gaze moved across the room. Then she crossed to the hearth and knelt. Samuel saw the ashes before she spoke. Bits of paper. His heart dropped. Clara picked up one blackened scrap with careful fingers. Only the edge remained, but a small piece of her handwriting showed through the burn. The ledger had been there. Samuel closed his eyes for one hard second. Then Clara stood. They burned some of it, she said. Some. She turned toward the table. If they burned all of it, they would have left the note and waited. This was for us to find. Samuel looked closer. On the table, cut into the wood with a knife, were 3 letters. C.L.A. Clara. His anger rose, but this time it did not scatter him. It settled. They wanted to scare you, he said. Clara's face was pale, but her voice was steady. Then they should have learned better from Red Willow. If you have ever watched someone stand again after life tried to bend them low, you know this kind of courage is not loud. It is the quiet breath before a person chooses not to break. They rowed back toward Mercy Creek without the ledger, but not without proof. Clara carried the burned scrap wrapped in cloth. Samuel carried the memory of that carved name like a coal under his ribs. By Sunday evening, the church hall was full. Mabel had done what only Mabel could do. She had turned private outrage into public duty. Women came with receipts. Men came with bills of sale. Harlan brought Brewer. Brewer brought 2 ranch hands. Even old Mercer came, sour-faced and stiff, holding a copy of the first debt Samuel had paid for Clara years before. Clara stood near the door, stunned by the number of people who had come. Samuel leaned close. Seems they were watching after all. Clara's eyes shone, though she did not let tears fall. I thought most of them only stared. Some did, he said, some learned. Then the church doors opened. Silas Vane stepped inside with Warren Pike at his shoulder. The room went silent. Vane removed his gloves slowly and smiled at the gathered town. Well, he said, isn't this a touching little trial without a judge? From the back of the hall, Mr. Avery entered, carrying a leather case. Behind him walked Sheriff Nolan, and in the sheriff's hand was Clara's missing ledger. Clara looked at the ledger in the sheriff's hand and forgot how to breathe. For 2 years and 4 months, that book had held the truth of her days. It held feed bought in hard weather, cattle sold for poor prices, nails counted one by one, mortgage payments scraped together by work that left her hands split and her back aching. It held every dollar she had put into Samuel's land when everyone else had already spoken of him in past tense. Now it sat in Sheriff Nolan's hand like a rescued child. Warren Pike's face changed first. Only for a second. But Samuel saw it. Silas Vane did not change at all. His smile stayed smooth, though his eyes sharpened like knife points. Sheriff Nolan walked down the center aisle of the church hall. He was a broad man with tired eyes and a mustache gone mostly gray. Folks in Mercy Creek did not call him brave often, but they did call him careful, and sometimes careful men made brave choices only after every excuse had run out. He set the ledger on the front table. Clara stepped toward it, then stopped herself, as if touching it too quickly might make it vanish. Samuel moved beside her. "Where did you find it?" he asked. The sheriff looked toward Pike. "In a trunk behind Mercer's old storage shed." Mercer, standing near the wall, went red with anger. "That shed has been rented by Pike's men for 3 months. I told you that, Sheriff." "You did," Nolan said, "and this morning I finally listened." A low murmur moved through the hall. Pike lifted both hands. "Now hold on. A rented shed proves nothing. Men leave all kinds of things in places." "Do they carve a woman's name into a cabin table too?" Samuel asked. Pike's mouth shut. Clara looked at Samuel. He gave the smallest nod. Sheriff Nolan opened the ledger. Several pages near the back were missing. Their torn edges showed rough and pale. Clara's hand moved toward the book now, and this time she did touch it. Her fingers rested on the cover. "They burned those pages," she said. "A few," Nolan answered. "Not enough." Mr. Avery came forward with his leather case. His face looked older than it had at the bank, as if the last 2 days had made him see the difference between caution and cowardice. "I reviewed the ledger before coming here," he said. "The entries match the bank's accepted payments. Dates, amounts, and sale records are in order. Mrs. Whitcomb kept cleaner books than half the ranchers in this county." A few people shifted with shame. A few others nodded. Vane gave a soft laugh. "A touching endorsement, Mr. Avery, but a ledger proves only that numbers were written." Mabel Price stepped forward so sharply her basket nearly slipped from her arm. "Then read my receipt." She placed a folded paper on the table. Harlan added his bill of sale. Brewer added 2. Doris Cross laid down a note for flour traded against eggs. Dr. Hale produced an invoice for medicine Clara had bought for a sick milk cow. One by one, the people of Mercy Creek came forward. Not all of them warmly. Not all with apology. But they came. The table filled with scraps of proof. Small papers, ordinary papers. The kind people folded into drawers and forgot until truth needed them. Clara stood motionless, watching the pile grow. Samuel leaned close and spoke low. "You were never as alone as they made you feel." Her eyes did not leave the table. It would have helped to know it sooner. He could not argue with that. Vane's smile had thinned. "None of this answers the legal matter. A widow with no claim cannot simply take control of a ranch because she feels moved by sentiment." "She did not take control," Samuel said. "She preserved property abandoned by neither owner nor law. I am alive. I confirm every payment. I confirm every action taken to save the broken lantern." "And if you had not returned?" Vane asked. Samuel looked at Clara, then back at him. "Then this town would owe her thanks instead of suspicion." The words struck the room quiet. For a moment, Clara's face trembled. Pike saw that and sneered. Pretty speeches do not change what she is. Samuel turned slowly. Sheriff Nolan said, "Careful." But Pike had already stepped too far. His pride, cornered and bitter, drove him where sense would not. A woman like her does not belong running a ranch. She belongs out where folks do not have to pretend not to stare. Red Willow learned that. Her brother learned it too. Clara went pale. Samuel moved, but Clara caught his arm. Not to stop him this time. To steady herself. Then she faced Pike. "Say his name," she said. Pike blinked. "My brother had a name, Daniel Whitcomb. Say it if you mean to use him." The hall went so still that the lamp seemed loud. Pike looked around and found no laughter waiting. No men near a stove ready to help him turn cruelty into sport. Only faces watching him, some ashamed, some angry, some newly awake. He swallowed. Daniel should have sold when he had the chance. Clara's voice stayed low. "You cut our fence." Vane snapped, "Do not answer that." But Pike was angry now, and angry men often did honest damage by mistake. "I never touched your brother," Pike said. "A fence is just wire." Mabel gasped. Sheriff Nolan's head lifted. Clara's hand tightened on Samuel's sleeve. Pike seemed to realize what he had said. He looked at Vane. Vane's face had gone cold. Sheriff Nolan stepped forward. "You just admitted to cutting the Red Willow fence." "No, I meant not that fence. I was speaking generally." "No man speaks generally about another man's death," Clara said. Her voice broke on the last word, but she did not lower her head. Samuel placed his hand over hers. In front of the whole town, without shame, he held it there. Vane put on his gloves. This has become emotional nonsense. I will be leaving. Sheriff Nolan moved between Vane and the door. Not yet. You have nothing on me. Maybe not enough, Nolan said, but I have enough to ask questions, and enough to hold Mr. Pike until he remembers which fences he has cut. Pike stepped back. His eyes darted like a trapped animal. Then, in the sudden stir near the door, he grabbed the nearest lamp and flung it to the floor. Flame burst across the old boards. People cried out and stumbled back. Samuel pulled Clara away as Harlan and Brewer rushed forward with coats to smother the fire. Smoke climbed fast toward the rafters. In the confusion, Pike ran. Samuel turned toward the open door, but his body failed him after 3 steps. He caught the back of a bench, furious at his own weakness. Clara did not chase Pike. She went for the table. The fire had reached the edge where the ledger lay. Without a word, she grabbed it against her chest and beat sparks from its cover with her bare hand. Samuel reached her as she turned, coughing, eyes watering, the ledger safe in her arms. Outside, hoofbeats tore into the night. Sheriff Nolan ran to the door and shouted for men to saddle up. But Clara only looked down at the blackened book pressed to her heart. Then a folded paper slipped from between its damaged pages and fell at Samuel's feet. It was not in Clara's handwriting. Samuel picked it up and read the first line. By the time he looked at Clara, his face had changed. "What is it?" she whispered. Samuel held the paper like it weighed more than the whole room. "It's a letter from Daniel," he said. "And Clara, it says he knew who ordered the fence cut." Samuel read Daniel Whitcomb's letter with smoke still hanging in the church hall. The paper had been folded small, hidden between 2 pages of Clara's ledger, as if Daniel had tucked his voice inside her work and waited for the right night to speak. Samuel's hands were blackened from the fire, but he held the letter gently. Clara stood before him, the burned ledger pressed to her chest. "What does it say?" she asked. Samuel looked at Sheriff Nolan first, then at Silas Vane, who had gone very still near the door. "It says Daniel knew Vane wanted Red Willow Draw for a grazing road," Samuel said. "It says Warren Pike came 3 times with offers, then threats. It says if anything happened to him, Clara should not believe it was chance." The room fell silent. Clara's face changed slowly, not with surprise. Somewhere deep inside she had always known, but knowing a thing alone and hearing it spoken before witnesses were not the same. Samuel kept reading. Daniel wrote that Pike said the fence would not hold forever. He wrote that Vane's men had already cut wire on the Carson place and blamed weather. He wrote he meant to ride into Mercy Creek with this letter, but he feared leaving Clara alone that night. Clara covered her mouth with one hand. Mabel Price began to cry quietly. Vane's voice came sharp. "A dead man's fear is not proof." "No," Sheriff Nolan said. "But a dead man's letter, a stolen ledger, burned pages, Pike's own words, and half a town of witnesses make a road I can follow." Vane looked toward the door. Harlan Price stepped in front of it. For the first time, Silas Vane looked like a man who had measured every acre, except the ground beneath his own feet. By dawn, Warren Pike was caught near the South Ford with a tired horse and Clara's missing pages wrapped inside his coat. He talked before breakfast. Men like Pike often did when the richer man stopped protecting them. He named Vane, named the cabin, named the orders to steal the ledger and frighten Clara into silence. Silas Vane did not swing from a rope. Samuel would not have wanted that, and Clara wanted it even less. Justice came cleaner and slower. Sheriff Nolan sent word to the county court. Mr. Avery froze every deal tied to Vane's Valley purchases. Ranchers who had been pushed, tricked, or frightened came forward with their own papers. By spring, Vane's fine gloves could not hide the dirt on his hands. He left Mercy Creek under a gray sky, not ruined by violence but by truth. That mattered to Clara. The broken lantern ranch stayed whole. The bank recognized Samuel as owner and Clara as equal partner. Mr. Avery signed the papers with his eyes lowered and his voice humble. Clara signed her name without shaking, though Samuel noticed she kept her copy folded close in her coat, the same way a lonely person holds proof that she belongs somewhere. Weeks passed. The burned ledger remained on the kitchen shelf. Clara would not throw it away. Its cover was scarred, its edges black, but most of the pages had survived. Samuel once asked why she kept it where everyone could see. She touched the cover with 2 fingers and said, "Because some things look ruined and still tell the truth." Spring came soft that year. Grass rose along the creek. Calves stumbled on thin legs near their mothers. The barn roof held through 3 hard rains. The garden Clara had planted began to show green. Samuel grew stronger with each week, though the mountain years had left their mark. Clara never treated him like a broken man. Samuel never treated her like a woman who needed making smaller. That was how trust grew between them. Not in grand speeches. In coffee ready before sunrise. In boots drying near the stove. In Samuel leaving Ellen's letter on the shelf beside the wooden horse Daniel had carved. In Clara placing fresh wildflowers on Ellen's grave, then standing back when Samuel came to speak with the past in his own quiet way. One evening, near the end of May, Samuel found Clara at the hill above the creek. She was standing beside Ellen's stone. The sunset had turned the pasture gold. Wind moved through the grass, and the cattle below shifted like dark shadows against the light. "I hope she would not mind me coming here," Clara said. Samuel stood beside her. "She would have liked you." Clara looked at him. "You sound sure." "She wrote that if kindness came to my door, I should let it in." Clara lowered her eyes. "I was only paying a debt." "No," he said softly. "You were building a life while both of us thought we were only surviving." The wind moved between them. Clara's hand hung at her side, rough and scarred from work. Samuel reached for it slowly, giving her time to refuse. She did not. Her fingers closed around his. Down in the yard, June gave a low sound from the fence. Smoke rose from the chimney, steady and gray, into the evening sky. If this story reminded you that quiet kindness can come back years later and save more than a piece of land, stay close to these frontier tales, because the heart remembers what the world forgets. Clara looked toward the ranch house, the barn, the creek, the repaired fences, and the land that had almost been stolen twice. "What do we call it now?" she asked. Samuel smiled a little. "Still the broken lantern, I reckon." "That name sounds sad." "It used to." He looked at the glowing windows below. "Now it sounds like something that kept burning." Together, they walked down the hill toward the house, hand in hand, while the last light of day rested on the roof Clara had saved and the home Samuel had finally stopped running from.